I'm Michael Bowes, Executive Director of the Association for the Wolf Lake Initiative. And over the next half hour or so, I'll be taking you on a tour, a virtual tour of the Wolf Lake watershed. And let me get set up here. It is important to note, I believe, that on our logo, it states that OLLI is a bi-state organization and that the most common resident of the Wolf Lake watershed is the mute swan. That's a close-up of a family of mute swans along a dike. That's if the swans weren't mute, what language would they speak? The answer is Chinese, because that's where they're from anyway. The aerial shot shows much of the Illinois and Indiana side of the watershed. The White Tank Farm is a Wolf Lake Terminals, which is located in Hammond, but dumps its stormwater across the state line into Illinois. We'll talk about that later. The system of dikes shown here was introduced in the 1950s to transport supplies and manpower to the construction site of the Indiana Toll Road. The federal government overseeing Eisenhower's interstate program forgot to remove them when the job was done. So Wolf Lake is one of the few, not only lake in either state, where you can fish the center without a boat. The entire watershed can be seen here with Lake Michigan in the background and a stretch of the Calumet River in the foreground. Wolf Lake water flows into the river through Indian Creek. More clearly shown are other sections of the watershed, Powderhorn and George Lakes, for example. There's Powderhorn and George Lake. When OLLI held its initial bi-state gathering on Wolf Lake in January 2000, its sponsors, the city of Chicago, could not find a map of the watershed. Illinois Department of Environmental Management had maps of only the Chicago side, and the city of Hammond had only the Indiana side. Finally, the city of Chicago produced a satellite map for the occasion. A watershed, by definition, is a body of water and all the land that drains into it. Here's a map that shows Indian Creek more clearly, and also Indian Creek along here, and also Calumet Container here. We'll talk about both later. What happened 12,000 years ago as the glaciers retreated back to Canada shaped the watershed. Lake succession describes what would have happened to Wolf Lake under certain circumstances, but man intervened to return Wolf Lake from a wetland back to a lake, but reduced George Lake by more than half. He hastened the demise of Berry and Hyde Lakes, or I guess in this article it's Deer Lake, but it's most often referred to as Berry Lake, I believe. Let's tour the watershed, beginning with Wolf Lake Memorial Park, which is managed by the city of Hammond. The virtual tour will circle counterclockwise around the thousands of acres that comprise the Wolf Lake watershed. Wolf Lake itself comprises 804 surface acres. 385 of them are in Indiana. This aerial view shows the speedway that operated during the first half of the 20th century along the lake's eastern shoreline north of Strawberry Island. Both cars and boats raced there. All the trash from the races was dumped into the water just north and west of the track. Today, that spot is known as Scout Island, and it's all that remains from those early days of racing. Taken today, that same aerial view would show the concert pavilion, the aquatic center adjacent to the old beach area, and windsurfers during the spring and fall. Recreation dominates on the Indiana side of Wolf Lake. Since the initial version of the PowerPoint in 2000, Hammond has treated the invasive Eurasian milfoil weed. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers restored the shorelines. Bike trails have been extended. And after a 2-year study, Dr. Young Choi of Purdue University Northwest warned about the reemergence of Eurasian milfoil and the invasive purple loosestrife and Phragmites, also known as common weed. Forsyth Park, part of Hammond's park system, lies along the north channel or Amazo channel of Wolf Lake. Cargill Inc., shown here, pumps water into the plant from Lake Michigan and then returns it to Lake Michigan. Unilever, which lies on the other side of the street, takes its water also from Lake Michigan, but then pumps it into Wolf Lake. Part of man's intervention involved the dumping of slag, a byproduct of the steelmaking industry, around the lake's periphery to fill in the wet areas. The shoreline reminds me of what you would see along a section of Maine shoreline. This shoreline was restored at Wolf Lake in 2005. So today it mimics a natural shoreline where there is a gradual incline into the water. This gradual incline supports fisheries and aquatic plants and other wildlife. More than 90% of Wolf Lake shoreline most likely consists of slag or some other fill material. And this photo can't be taken today because that shoreline has been restored. But before it was restored, you could step off the slag and the water may be as deep as a foot. So there was no fisheries with this type of shoreline. Now, Eggers Grove is managed by the Forest Preserve District of Cook County and introduces us to the Illinois side of the watershed. It once drained into Wolf Lake, but the flow was reversed with the construction of the Nike missile launch site to its south in the 1950s and 60s. The drainage now flows northward into Chicago's sewer system. Ollie would like to see the natural drainage restored, but that would be costly. Cook County also manages the 20-acre Nike missile launch site. The I-90 tollway, you can see, is just off to the right. And that's 112th Street that runs east-west along the bottom of the photo. A system to control water levels were added recently to Eggers Grove. The Illinois Department of Natural Resources manages William Powers State Recreation Area, which includes 419 surface acres of Wolf Lake. It is important to note that the Indiana and Illinois state houses arrived at opposite conclusions in the 1940s. Illinois decided the state could establish a park within the limits of a city. Indiana eventually decided it should not. Conservation predominates on the Illinois side of Wolf Lake, where hunting for waterfowl is still permitted. Today, scientists are studying the life of the endangered mud puppy, an aquatic salamander whose population is on a steep decline throughout the Great Lakes. There is also a wetland section on which radar towers once existed to direct the flight of Nike missiles against Russian bombers. The 2002 BioBlitz identified more than 2,500 species of plants and animals over a 24-hour period at the Wolf Lake watershed. Wolf Lake exits to Lake Michigan via Indian Creek and the Calumet River. Once a meandering stream that looped its way westward, Indian Creek was reduced to a ditch. Man is now trying to put the curves back into the creek. It lies on the south end of the former Republic Steel Mill, which became LTV in its final years. A third of Indian Creek is owned by Chicago and is being restored here. This is about 2003. One of Ollie's projects is to restore the remaining section, which is currently privately owned. That will be costly because much of the adjacent soils are highly contaminated, and it is now a Superfund site. One of the adjacent parcels is the Hyde Park, is the Hyde Lake wetlands. That's all that's left of the lake. It is also privately owned. The 40 acres, now dominated by Phragmites, is another cleanup project. Continuing our tour along the southern shoreline of Wolf Lake, we encounter Powderhorn Lake and Prairie, managed by the Forest Preserve District of Cook County. The lake attracts fishing enthusiasts. The prairie attracts birders and nature lovers. That's a trailer court in the center of the photo. And Wolf Lake Terminals is the white tank farm off to the right, upper right. In 2022, Powderhorn Lake was reconnected with Wolf Lake along Avenue K in the neighborhood of Hegewisch. A close-up view of the Wolf Lake terminal site. The plant or the tank farms contain petroleum, industrial cleaners, and many other caustic materials. Wolf Lake terminals pump storm water containing oil products across the state line and into the Illinois side of Wolf Lake. The plant was fined by the US EPA in 1992, around 2000, and it is currently being sued because of over its permits. At the state line between Powderhorn and Wolf Lake, the tour passes the Calumet container site, now a brownfield, but where once 55-gallon industrial drums were recycled, and until 1982, when there was a fire at the plant. Ollie was the lead organization for the $2.9 million cleanup and restoration of the Superfund site. It was conducted by the US EPA from 2002 to 2006. Challenges to the effort are the railroad lines along two sides of the triangular shaped property, buried pipelines that cross the property, phragmites that pose a threat to residents of the adjacent trader communities, that's to the east and the west, and the multiple owners that include NIPSCO and the city of Hammond. In the cleanup, top 18 inches of soil were removed from the site and replaced with clean soil. This is another view of the dikes that crisscross the lake. And this is George Lake, which was once about the size of Wolf Lake, was largely filled in during the early 1920s in anticipation of a steel mill that never materialized. Some 20 years ago, an 18-hole golf course replaced a slag field to the south of the lake. Federated metals contaminated the northeast corner of the lake, which needed to be dredged of contaminants a dozen or so years ago. It was a former metal smelting, refining, recovery, and recycling facility that operated nearly 50 years ago in Hammond, just north of the Calumet College of St. Joseph. Polyjohn, just south of the college, manufactures portable toilets. In 2021, it was discovered that its discharges over many years had traveled through a wetland and had reached George Lake. The tour ends at George Lake, which is managed which is managed by the city of Hammond. The northern portion remains a wetland. The southern portion was dredged in the past decade to form a part of the Lost Marsh Golf Course. And included in this area is an observation deck for the study by Calumet College students and is open to the public. And the Environmental Education Center has been closed and will be replaced by a Hammond firehouse. And it, for those that have been there, you will remember the trout stream that is kind of a major attraction to the environmental center. So the Association for the Wolf Lake Initiative was formed in 1999 to serve as the lead bi-state organization for the $8.9 million shoreline restoration project conducted by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. That project was among the recommendations made by Dr. Young Choi of Purdue in a study he conducted at the time. Ollie's mission to protect and enhance the watershed has remained unchanged during the past 20 plus years. Also unchanged are its three goals: to encourage bi-state dialogue, to promote the watershed, and to advocate for improvements. If you need to scratch down any of the contact information, please do. And thank you for joining me on this virtual tour of the Wolf Lake watershed.